We will begin with our opening remarks, and for that, I will turn the floor over to you, Mr. D'Angelo. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Good afternoon. It's great to be here this afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity. Le projet de train à grande fréquence de Via Rail n'est pas seulement une initiative de transport. Il s'agit d'une révolution qui a le pouvoir de redéfinir la façon dont les Canadiens se déplacent, se rencontrent et s'épanouissent. The HFR will connect Canada's largest corridor. That's Quebec City to Windsor. With already almost 20 million people living in the region and plans for another 5 million to move there, it means that having options that are sufficient, frequent, and reliable to connect Canadians affordably and quickly is paramount. En partant du port de la ville capitale du Québec, le TFG va passer par le cœur de la belle province et à travers l'Ontario, la grande région de Toronto, pour finir de la frontière Windsor-Detroit, où transitent des millions de personnes et des milliards de marchandises de partout au Canada. C'est un corridor majeur et la capacité actuelle est insuffisante. So CUTA recognizes that the success of HSR relies on accepting the challenge and the promise of connecting people. So that means connecting with Canadians, consulting with transit authorities throughout the various project phases, and doing that early and often. So it was great that the HFR team has already been meeting with local transit systems like the TTC and others to have these important discussions. So maintaining a focus on the connections between the intra-city HFR and inner-city public transit is essential. From the design and development through day one of operations and beyond, we have before us an opportunity to build a connected travel experience in an era where more car traffic and short-haul planes will miss out on creating value by saving Canadians time and money and building on our productivity. Le projet de train à grande fréquence n'est pas juste un projet de transport. Il va réduire notre empreinte carbone, il va aider à combattre les changements climatiques, il va améliorer la qualité de vie pour tous les Canadiens. Moreover, we have other programs that are coming online that will help us to build transit more quickly, and I think about the Permanent Public Transit Fund, the importance of which could not be overstated in this context. The $3 billion annual fund beginning in April 2026 will play a crucial role in providing the financial resources needed to support the transformational projects that will complement things like high-frequency rail. So these expenditures are also investments, more importantly, and investments in our nation's future. So continued support for Permanent Transit Fund and for transit systems will lead to a wide array of collective public benefits. De plus, le TGF offre des avantages sociaux en facilitant la visite des Canadiens à leurs proches, en augmentant l'accessibilité pour les personnes à mobilité réduite et en favorisant la cohésion sociale en rapprochant notre pays. Les avantages économiques sont tous aussi importants car ce projet créera des emplois, stimulera les économies locales et encouragera l'innovation dans les secteurs des transports. Let me briefly turn to transit-oriented development in communities. These offer sustainable and high-density living options which are accessible through public transit. So by fostering TODs, we can reduce car dependency, lower our emissions, and create vibrant communities. So the time to act, we believe, is now, as Canada's population is expected to reach 45 or 50 million people in the coming years. Today's transit systems are designed for about 25 million. We know there's a demand for over 5 million homes by 2030. We need those to adequately address our nation's housing supply requirements. CUTA released a housing and transit paper here in Parliament just a few weeks ago. The report, I think, will be helpful for the committee members as you progress through your study. Transformational projects that will be funded through the Permanent Transit Fund, again, can advance these aims, keeping in mind that HFR makes the links between our corridor cities real. Le projet de TGF est une occasion capitale unique de redéfinir la façon dont nous voyageons et vivons au Canada. Il va renforcer le plus important corridor économique. Il va relier nos communautés plus facilement. Il offre un avenir meilleur pour tous les Canadiens. Alors, merci pour votre attention. Je serai heureux de répondre à vos questions sur ce projet vital.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur D'Angelo.
My next question is for Mr. D'Angelo. I'm curious about the delays, and we know that the HFR project was scheduled to close, scheduled for 2030, and that's more than 10 years, well, almost 10 years from now, and which is more than 20 years from the original date that it was scheduled to close. How realistic is this 2030 timeline?
Well, I mean, we can look to the cost of inaction and delaying, and so we're really excited that HFR has gotten as far as it has, and where it goes next, we think can be done in an affordable, responsible way, as the HFR CEO talked about when he presented last time. But I'm also happy to report across Canada that while there's many challenges facing urban rail projects in the city of Edmonton, the Valley Line Southwest was just opened over the weekend, and that was fantastic. The REM project is continuing its construction while it has open revenue service from Gare Centrale de Brossard. And of course, very excited about reading in the throne speech in Alberta, Premier Smith's commitment to exploring a Banff to Calgary link to the airport, but also looking ahead to Calgary, Red Deer, and Edmonton. So there's governments across Canada that are putting best practices together to make sure that we build a rail future for Canadian travelers.
I've had experience with one project. It was a public-private partnership that basically shut down because of inflationary projections, and they did not project for inflation. Do you see any risk of that in this project?
Well, I don't have the exact project that you're thinking of. But
Fortis, it was the name. It was,
okay.
Yeah, it was.
In the transit space, I mean, the city of Edmonton utilized a P3 model to open the Valley Line, similar to what was done with Vancouver's Canada Line before the Olympics, and also in the region of Waterloo, delivering transit across Kitchener, and that's being done through different P3 models. So there are ways that they can work to add value, but also to deliver transit to Canadians when they need it most, which is yesterday or as soon as possible, so we can reach them so they can connect around their community.
Is it normal to have cost benefit or cost analysis that have inflationary projections included in the project, so that we're not faced with wasting taxpayer dollars when people are going to food banks and don't have enough food to eat?
15-second response,
Indeed,
please.
very briefly, if you take a look at the Ontario budget for this past year, the Ontario government was reserving over the next decade, previously to the budget, it's about $70 billion, and for inflation, that number was changed to about $77 billion over the decade.
Thank you.
Cognizant of inflation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. D'Angelo, and thank you, Dr. Lewis.
My next question is to Mr. D'Angelo. As we've heard here today, reliability is a big plus of HFR and even high-speed rail. Because they operate on dedicated passenger track, VIA operates on some of its own track and mostly on host railways like CN. Very roughly, what is the difference in reliability and on-time performance between the two? And can a passenger railway be truly successful on other people's tracks competing with their trains? I'd like to hear your opinion, and perhaps Mr. Pelican can weigh in.
Well, briefly then, certainly having your own right-of-way facilitates travel, reduces travel time because you don't encounter large freight trains. The rails that are owned by CN or CP have a radio center that's owned by those freight companies, and so they're managing their own traffic, and so we want passengers to come first, and that's what clients expect in their modes of travel, whether it's by car, plane, or other modes, that people come before goods, and that can only really happen with dedicated rights of way, and there's good examples of that even in Florida with travel times on the Bright Line between Orlando and Miami, so really having a dedicated right of way is quite helpful.
Mr. D'Angelo, you were also making some commentary around that, so you want to jump in there as well?
With respect to building rail and building, okay, thank you.
Would be, would benefit Canadians overall.
Yeah, certainly, we've been supportive of connecting communities by rail, whether it's been Via Rail doing so with its plans in the corridor, whether it's been Metrolinx helping to connect cities that are across the the Greater Toronto Area, the Greater Golden Horseshoe, bringing people to Niagara seasonally to enjoy tourism, just to come back to the tourism question. The opening of innovative projects like the Union Pearson Express that help to bring people from Pearson Airport to enjoy downtown Toronto. And of course, rail projects that are helping to connect communities around the country, the expansion of the REM, the continuing build out of the Ottawa LRT, plans for other rail projects as well in Mississauga and in Brampton, the potential for projects in Hamilton and in Quebec City, that which is advanced a bit, even talking about it in Gatineau. So really across Canada, cities and leaders are turning to urban rail as an effective solution at moving groups of people around.
And of course, you mentioned at the beginning 20 million people in the region and growing by another 5 million well into the future. But so we see the need, obviously, for that. Mr. Pelican, Via Rail estimates that by offsetting more car trips, HFR would reduce 10.3 to 13.9 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions over the project's 30-year life cycle. Can you explain to this committee how you came about these findings and how you plan to reduce emissions? Mr. D'Angelo, did you want to comment on that as well?
Yes, I think that what's clear is you've got a congested area between Quebec City and Windsor, and we know that Canadians and travelers want to take advantage of getting between those cities for work, for meetings, for tourism, and you've seen the number of flights grow by Porter Airlines expanding the number of services they offer now, flying out of Pearson. You see the congestion on our roads, the opening of additional highways to better connect to get out of the Greater Toronto Area to move eastward through 407 East and other road expansion projects. So the hunger and the need is out there, and what rail can provide is a productivity opportunity to keep working during those times, to stay in contact with their families through by being on land and being able to use Wi-Fi effectively on board and other amenities. So really, there's a number of great arguments for the need to connect people.
Thank you very much, Mr. D'Angelo, and thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for Mr. D'Angelo from the Canadian Urban Transit Association. I believe I heard you use the phrase people before goods, and this very much reflects the line of questioning that I was presenting to Mr. Pelican. And I wonder if CUTA would support legislation or regulations in Canada that would codify that principle of passengers before freight on our rail network.
Yeah, indeed, I think that's something that would take further study. On its face, it sounds that that would be very helpful. I mean, just look at the example of just at the end, about a month ago, where CN, who manages the rail corridor around Union Station, lost some internet connectivity, and as a result, systems like Metrolinx were not able to deliver along the lakeshore line for a few hours and left passengers stranded or waiting. Even in the example of even southwest of that, as far as London, there was impacts just based on that. So I think there is room for regulation in that area.
Thank you very much.
We'll go to Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, turn the floor over to you. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses this afternoon. My first question, I don't really know who to direct it to, so I suppose I'll pick on you, Mr. D'Angelo. But that's only because I think you might have the answer. The first question I have is, I believe in your opening testimony, you had mentioned Quebec to Toronto, which of course my ears perked up because Essex next to Windsor. And now there's a lot of discussion about the Windsor corridor, which I'd be crazy not to be excited about that. And I like the way Mr. Badaway, he spoke about making it binational. We've got Detroit sitting right there. I don't know, just one of the craziest international border crossings in North America. So my question for you is, and I guess I'm a bit confused, because I believe it to be true there's a final report coming out promised by the minister by the end of 2023, the then minister, Minister Agbra. Are you aware of that final report?
Well, let me address the Windsor component that you raised. Thanks for doing that, and it's a very important part of the corridor. We know with the amount of truck traffic that there is on the 401, we know about the times of the year that are inclement between, especially London and Windsor. That people need a safe way to get from Windsor to Toronto, and with London in between. We know that there's so many people that are choosing to drive from Windsor to the Detroit airport to take a flight to Montreal. These are things that don't make sense.
I very much appreciate it. So, are you aware of the report?
Not the specific report.
Okay.
That
Have you been asked to be part of any roundtables with the ministry?
Not in this calendar year.
Monsieur D'Angelo, quels sont les défis que vous pouvez partager avec nous en ce qui concerne le rail à haute fréquence?
Je pense que c'est une question intéressante, mais c'est important de noter que l'objectif est de relier un nombre important de communautés et de maximiser le nombre de gens qui peuvent prendre le train. Alors, le TGV perd en efficacité. La clé est que le trajet soit pratique, fiable, accessible au plus grand nombre par le TGF, par exemple.
Merci. Je transfère le reste du temps à mon collègue Peter Shipsky.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Iacano. I'd like to thank my colleague for ceding some of his time to me today. It's rare that I get the opportunity to ask a question. We had the new Crown Corporation here to discuss the high-frequency rail project. They had provided testimony to say that no decision has been made as to whether or not it will be high-frequency or some kind of merger between high-frequency and high-speed. One of the arguments or responses that we frequently hear is that Canada has a climate that is not favorable, particularly in the east, to have a high-speed rail model. Given the expertise that we have with you, Mr. Pélican, and you, Mr. D'Angelo, what would you say to somebody who says Canada cannot have a high-speed rail here? And if you were in favor, or the response would be that we can have one, do you have models perhaps that you were aware of around the world, given your expertise and your history in transport, rail transport? Do you have any models you can share with the committee that you think would work well, that you've seen around the world? Thank you.
In terms of cold weather and the winter, you need to think about also comparing to other modes. So thinking about getting to the airport, getting through security without a Nexus card, and you have dozens of people in front of you with boots and coats and backpacks, the time to get through security, the congestion at Pearson and at Billy Bishop and at Montreal International Airport. These are all things where today, we had great weather, people got where they needed to go, but there's other times where flights get canceled, get prioritized, and especially those hub and spoke out of Toronto and Montreal, those suffer quite a bit in the reductions of service, whether it's to Windsor or to North Bay or to Sept-Îles for folks that are trying to connect to the rest of the country. It's difficult in the cold weather and other modes as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. D'Angelo.
Merci pour la précision. Donc là, c'est le Sud qui va s'occuper aussi de l'opération Montréal-Québec, je veux dire la filiale. Pour M. D'Angelo, je vais faire écho un peu à M. Badawi tout à l'heure qui mentionnait l'enjeu de dire, OK, là, il y a un projet de faire de Québec à Toronto, mais ailleurs sur la planète, il y a des liaisons quasiment continentales qu'on voit entre des réseaux de trains à grande fréquence. Dans quelle mesure on pense que ça peut être une vision qui devrait se bâtir à comment relier avec les États-Unis, comment relier avec l'Ouest canadien ou même avec le Mexique, l'Amérique du Sud, je ne sais pas.
Non, vraiment, c'est important de trouver une façon de rendre la ville facile aux passagers. Alors, il faut beaucoup d'options comme horaires, comme des trajets, aussi avec les horaires pour tout le monde. Et c'est l'idée de grande fréquence. Il faut que les gens puissent se rendre au TGF facilement. Et ça peut être facile grâce des stations au centre-ville, mais aussi en dehors, pour connecter les grandes populations dans les centrales des villes, mais aussi dans les quartiers au dehors des centres-villes, parce qu'on doit se souvenir toujours que c'est très...
Ma question,
Merci, M. D'Angelo.